Okay, 10:25, we'll stay on schedule. Whoops. Okay, Michael, can you see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, great. Okay, so next part of our presentation here is planning a successful tax credit application. Okay, I decided I would start with some FAQs for this for the presentation. There's a lot of FAQ type things in this program. So first, number one question, where are the forms? The forms are fillable PDFs, and you can download them from our website at tap.wa.gov. You need to download them to your computer before you try to open them. If you get a message that says you can't preview the form at this time, it looks like it's not going to work, go ahead and hit the download button anyway. It should still be there, and it will download it to your computer. And once you've got it on your computer, on your desktop or wherever, then you could be able to open it and fill it out. So if you continue to have trouble, obviously feel free to call me and I can send it to you. Number two, should I send hard copies or digital copies? Well, it's kind of not technically straightforward. It is a hard copy of the Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3, and all amendments and attachments are always required for the National Park Service. So I will always require one hard copy of all of these things for Park Service. Park Service does not accept digital copies of the applications. Now, there are times when David will ask for more information, and maybe you could email him back with that information, and that's fine. That'll be, case by case basis, but all the application materials need to be one copy sent to me in hard copy. Now, for my record keeping purposes here at TAP, and I do have those, I want a digital copy of the exact version that we're going to be sending up to National Park Service. So the reason I might want a hard copy is not to make you print things out. I want a hard copy if it's a Part 2 and it is, got a lot of pages, to be honest with you, because it is really hard to review a Part 2 on a computer screen, because I often will put the photographs and the description of rehabilitation and the plans side by side so I can get the whole picture, and it's impossible to do on a computer screen. Maybe some of you can do it, but I don't like to do it yet. So that is why I would request a hard copy. Now, if it's something that doesn't have a lot of pages, like an amendment or something short or a Part 1, then I may not need a hard copy. So don't print out a bunch of stuff thinking I want it when I may not. It's best to if you just give me a call, or we can just chat about it real quick. I'm happy to just tell you, print it, don't print it. I don't want to print paper that doesn't need to be printed either. So just ask. Whoops, that wasn't right. Backwards. When you have too many things on your screen and you start pressing buttons. Okay, so where do you send the application? Well, you will always mail your hard copies of your application to me at the DAP offices. I send them to National Park Service after I do my review, and I send them via FedEx to the Park Service. So there's my email to send a digital version. You can, if it's too big, then you can send it to me in some type of FTP that you have, or Dropbox, or a link to SharePoint, or whatever you want to do. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. So number 4, yes, how will the application get to MPS? I will send it to MPS via FedEx. And I will often now send you the tracking information after I send it, so you can know right when it gets there. We send it next day. It goes out of our offices, I believe, at 4:30. They come pick it up, and then it will be there the next day. So is there a fee for this program? Yes, there's a fee for this program, and the fee is based on the estimated qualified expenditures that you state on your Part 2 application. So it is important and required to put the estimated qualified expenditures on the application so they know how much to charge you. I don't know off the top of my head what all the breakdown of the fees is. I think the biggest fee is like 2,500 or something like that. That's for like millions and millions of dollars project. So yes, there's a fee, and the breakdown is available on the Park Service website. Can you send a draft? Yes, please send a draft to me. I would love to look at it and help you figure out if it's going to get approved or not. So that's our goal. Can it be approved and quickly approved? So there's no conditions or anything on it. So that's what I want for every project. You can call, yes, you can call or email me with questions anytime. I'm happy to help. Number 8, how long does it take DAP to review things? So it depends on how big the project is. If it's a big part 2 with a complicated building, it might take me a couple of weeks, but never more than 30 days and usually less. I realize that all these projects are time sensitive, and I'm very aware of that, and I try to do the best I can to get these projects out as soon as possible. And the final question, how long does it take MPS to review things? Well, I think David could probably expand on that a little later, but I believe it's a 30-day review period. So you should hear something at the end of a 30-day period. I think they probably, I think he's running around 30 days right now. Remember, he has 7 states. It's a lot of states. So he runs around 30 days. So. Okay, let's see. All right, so let's talk about photos. How do you submit photos? For every part, you're going to submit some photos. So here's a good example of a good photo layout. There's 2 photos per page or 1 photo if you have something that is in portrait orientation. We would prefer not to have sideways photos on the pages. If you've got a portrait, just use 1 page for your photo. These photos are numbered and labeled, and the numbers that are key to a plan. So well, I'll show you a picture of the plan here in just a second. They have to be keyed so we know exactly where they were taken. Sometimes it's obvious, like these 2 are fairly obvious. We would know that it's the exterior and kind of what side it's on, but for interiors, it's really important that you have a key plan. Please make sure that your photos are high resolution. We can't have blurry photos. They're just impossible to see anything. It's already hard looking at a building just with photos. As many of you probably know, there are many things that you cannot see in a photo, which is why a site visit is really essential for these projects. So please, we ask that if you have a printed version, please don't double side the print. And also you need to print on photo paper per MPS guidelines. Final version of whatever you're going to send, it should be a PDF. So don't send any Word documents. You can do this in Word. You can make these photo pages in Word. If you have InDesign, I've got a template on the website you can use to that includes the captions and stuff like that. So please always send PDFs of the final attachment sheets, like photos. Okay. So here's an example of a photo key. It's not for that building, but it's see how there's a number and there's an arrow pointing which direction we're looking at. So they're essential to us understanding where the photos were taken. Okay, so we will go over the part 1 again, more in depth this time. It's important. So remember that the part 1 is the certification of the historic structure. Or it's a preliminary determination of individual listing. So as in the case of an unlisted building. What we want to know in the part 1 is building story. How the building came to be, what's the current state of the building and how are those two states different? So what's the historic state? What does it look like now? Is really what we want to know in the part one. What is the history? All of the history, as much as you can get. You know, obviously there's a lot of buildings that the history is not attainable. You know, so in these cases, you have to kind of look and use your architectural history experience to figure out what was changed when. The part one, what you're planning to do to the buildings is really not relevant in the part one. This is the backstory that we need. So included with the cover sheet with the original signature, we've got to have clear recent photos key to a plan. And if you've got a scenario where you've got multiple buildings on a property, we need a site plan. So we know what all the buildings are. Historic photos and plans, if available, anytime. Don't hold back with the historic photos. They make so much easier to do a review when you don't have to ask what is this, so don't hold back. When we get a part two, we're going to refer back to the part one. We're going to refer back to the nomination if it's already listed and look and see what all this stuff is. But if there isn't much yet, then please don't hold back with the historic photos. We also need in the part one, the description of the condition and significance of the building. And really important is dates of notable alterations. So like I mentioned just a bit ago, just reiterate, for part ones, please send one hard copy with the original signature to DAP for forwarding to National Park Service. Please send a digital copy also to my email. DAP will send the application to NPS. Part ones, I can usually get out within 2 weeks, depending on what else is going on. 30 days usually for David. Something to know about the part one, since this is the certification or the preliminary certification, a part one cannot be done after a project is finished. So if you have not looked into tax credits and decide after the fact that you've got a building that you want to get tax credits on, you cannot apply after the project is finished. If you've got so the part one doesn't need to be filled out for a building that's individually listed, remember. But if you've got a multi-building site, or if you've got a contributing building and you've already completed the project, you can't apply after it's completed. The building wasn't certified at the time of completion, so you cannot have a certified project. Okay, Michael glossed over this a little bit in his presentation. So say you've got a building that you think will be able to be certified once the cover is removed. You've got a historic building under there. You've got to remove the cover before you do the part one. So we've got to have pictures of what the historic building actually looks like. We can't speculate about what might be behind the cover. So sometimes you might have to do some selective demolition of non-historic features to illustrate that there is a historic building underneath that is actually going to be able to be listed on the register or certified as contributing. You might have a storefront that's covered, that might need to be selectively demoed in order to uncover the historic transoms or, prove that that stuff is there. So this is the scenario where if you have multiple buildings on a property. So say this little warehouse district here is under one ownership. All these buildings will go on the same application. So with the part one, you'll have a part one with the photos, the history, the significance, and a site plan detailing what each building is. If you are going to rehab all these buildings, then all of these buildings will go on the same part two, and then the same part three, etc. These buildings were, and the key here is that these buildings were functionally related historically. So historically, they were related to each other. You know, complexes are like this, like military installations, or say, you know, a state hospital complex or things like that. If they're historically functionally related, then they will most likely go on the same application through the process. Say, you know, you're gonna do a rehab of only like 2 of these buildings. So you still will need to have all the buildings on the part 1. And then you would, in your part 2, you would illustrate, you know, describe the rehabilitation project, and then you would take photos and just illustrate that you're not going to do any work. You'd say you're not going to do any work on these other buildings, and then you would provide photos after illustrating that you didn't do any work to those buildings. So. You know, example of, you know, 3 buildings, you know, under the same ownership that are on the same property. You know, if there's 3 buildings, they're not functionally related historically. Say you've got 3 downtown commercial buildings. They're built separately and operated separately within their historic periods of significance. In this case, there'd be 3 different applications, one for each building, because they were not historically functionally related. They weren't connected on the interior. They weren't, you know, they were used for separate things. So even if there's, you know, holes in the walls and they're connected now. So the key is, were they related, functionally related historically? Okay, so you've got that part 1. You've got it in, and you've got an approval. You've got an approval of either your building is certified now, or it is on its way to getting listed. So here we are. We're going to the part 2. We're going to describe the rehabilitation. So this is the cover sheet. There's a couple of things on here that you need to make sure you know. It's going to ask you, if the building is listed, is it in a district? You know, what's the status of the certification? The estimated rehabilitation costs will be on there, so they can assess the fee. At this point, you've got to choose if you want the 24-month period, test period for the substantial rehabilitation, or if you want the 60-month test period for the substantial rehabilitation. Once you claim the 24, you can't go back and change it to the 60, okay? There is a little checkbox for the owner attestation saying that I'm the owner and I agree to this application. You've got to check the box whether you are or not the owner. And if you've got to have an ownership letter of approval if you are not the fee simple owner of the property. So a letter from the property owner saying, yes, I know. There's an example of this on the Park Service website and in the application instructions, I think, for what this letter has to say. Your social security number, obviously, or your tax ID number. Most have a tax ID number. And then the original signature, which is really important, the MPS has to have. Okay. All right, that's the cover sheet. Okay, so before you tackle the form, before you start filling out the rehab, things you need to know about your building. Know the period of significance for the building. Number 2, know what the character defining features are. And number 3, know that existing non-historic conditions can stay as long as you don't touch them. An applicant is not required to change anything that exists when they purchase the building. But if they do start to change things, then the changes have to be in line with the standards. For example, there may be a drop ceiling in the main corridor when you bought the building. The historic condition of this corridor is a flat ceiling with pendant lighting or something. If you choose to remove the drop ceiling, you may not install a new drop ceiling. You're going to have to now propose a ceiling treatment that is more in line with the historic condition of the building. So it's probably going to have to be, whatever it was. So if it was flat plaster, then probably if the plaster is still up there, it could be repaired, then we'll have to do that. Maybe the plaster is gone and it's damaged beyond repair, then we can do drywall because it looks pretty much the same as plaster. You have to propose a ceiling treatment that's more in line with the standards. So That is something you'll need to think about as you go through your building and figure out what needs change and what doesn't. Sometimes due to cost, that those decisions can be made to leave things in there as opposed to removing them. Okay. Just a little further explanation of existing conditions and terms we use all the time. Existing condition and beyond repair is a term you'll hear quite a bit because it's the standard. So it's, remember, one of the key points of the standards for rehabilitation is repair historic materials rather than replace them. So we look to see, and beyond repair, as a term is subjective, of course. It's beyond reasonable repair most of the time. So I just mentioned, this drop ceiling in this corridor. So here's another example of an existing condition inherited by the new owner. On the left, they've got a drywall installed over all of the historic plaster. The plaster was still there. It was probably cracked and damaged. And so they just put up drywall over it. So this is an example of a condition that would not be approved if it were to be proposed in a Part 2 application. So you see how this drywall stands proud, basically, of historic trim. And obviously the wall finish should be behind the trim in a case like this. And yes, we do get into these fine details. So this condition exists in this building in some parts of the hallway. It's kind of random. The building owner inherited kind of a second story mess of half finished spaces and half unfinished and things like that. So now the current applicant is not penalized for what someone else did, 10, 20 years ago or whatever. But they're under no obligation to remove any, conditions that don't meet the standards that they didn't do. This can stay right where it is. This condition, though, cannot be replicated anywhere else in the building just because it exists right here. So 2 wrongs don't make a right, right? So you can't use it anywhere else. It could stay there, and if you take it off, you're going to have to return to, a more compatible condition, which would be the wall finish behind the trim instead of standing over the trim. So beyond repair, if you are to claim in your application that a feature is beyond repair, you have got to illustrate this through photos. You have to prove it. We can't take your word for it. You've got to have proof. The questions that David and I will ask would be like, prove that this is beyond repair. We need a window survey, blanket statement such as the windows are all beyond repair. We can't repair them. Isn't enough. So in our view of beyond repair may be different than your view of beyond repair. So David has a lot of experience, with these projects and looking at, things that have been completed and done. And so just because maybe you think it can't be done doesn't mean it can't be done. We just need to look at it a little bit differently. Okay. So you've got your Part 2 description of rehabilitation form out, and these are the things that we need to put on it. So describe the pre-rehabilitation condition of the property on a feature-by-feature basis. So we'll look at the form in the next slide and see what that means exactly. And then you're going to describe the corresponding proposed work on these features. If you have already started work, the photos and description of the in-process or completed work should also be included. So the application should be, what is the condition of the property right this minute as you are sending this application in? Not what it looked like before you started, but we need to know that too. But if you've already completed work, we need to know that. So exterior, interior photographs documenting all areas of the property, even if no work is planned there, should be included. Make sure, I mean, the detail pictures are welcome. You know, I always want to see like detail photos of like windows and stuff because it's hard to tell anything about a window from you know, a faraway picture. And overall overall photos of interior spaces are essential so we can get a whole picture. And then you're going to need to supply floor plans and elevation drawings that reflect the existing condition at the very least. If you've got historic drawings, that's great. Please include those as well. And then the proposed drawings. So, and then please put those on no smaller than 11 by 17 sheets. When you print them out at 11 by 17 or something close to that, not smaller. And you don't need to print out the big full-size sheets of this for me or for David. Okay, so the amount of documentation necessary depends on the size of the project. We need to see that everything that may affect the character, anything that will be visible or an alteration. You know, section drawings or detail drawings are warranted in many projects. Sometimes they're not. You know, if there's something happening in the middle of the room that doesn't show up in the typical elevation, you know, or the reflected ceiling pan, we might need a section of that room. Include HVAC plans, finish schedules, floor to ceiling finish schedules, window and door schedules, and reflected ceiling plans. You should include cut sheets for lighting, windows and flooring. For window replacement, which David will go over, cut sheets aren't enough. You need to have actual drawings, and David will cover that. One thing we normally don't need printed out is pages and pages of construction specifications. So unless there's something specific to a treatment of a historic material, such as masonry, generally we don't need that giant specifications document at all. So if you send your application and we need something, we'll ask for it. Okay, I mentioned always that we need drawings of the existing plan and historic if available. If the existing plan is different from the historic plan, or if there's alterations that you know about, know that happened, please try to illustrate it on the plan in some way. It's important for us to know the dates of like the walls and the corridors and the stairways and things like that. And it's really easy for us to understand if you just highlight which walls are which, especially if there's a lot of changes in the building. So, you know, if there's more than one period of changes, then just use different color highlighters, you know, whatever you need to do to kind of clearly illustrate what the historic condition was, what current condition is, and what the proposal is, so we can tell the difference between them. So here is what it looks like on the application sheet itself. Remember, I said we had to do feature. Let's see. Okay, so the first thing up there, it says feature. So there's, you know, this is one has siding. So you can break the features down into different chunks, however they work best for the application. So we need to know what the feature is. So it's the siding, and the date of the feature is 1900-ish. It's very important to know. Remember, we need to know what the historic character defining features are. So if we have a date right here, we know right away this is a historic feature. If this said 1984, we would not be worried too much about alterations to this feature. But we would be looking for, you know, a compatible replacement. So this first little paragraph here at the top, it is describe the existing feature and its condition. This will be longer or shorter depending on the complexity of the feature. So this one says the current siding appears to have been installed at the time of the 1900 expansion. all excellent information we need to know about. It says it's in fair condition, except for the boards at the front of the house near the ground. So we assume that those boards are somehow rotten or not repairable. So you can see here it says photo numbers. So we want to know, we want photos of the existing feature. And then we want you to reference the photo numbers right here. So we can go back and say, look at photos 1 through 7 when we get to this application, and look at the photos and say, okay, this is what siding looks like. This is what they're talking about. Here's a picture of that rotten siding that they mentioned. These boards at the front of the house near the ground. We need to know what those are. Maybe that's photo number 10, right? And then if there's a drawing that references a repair or a change, it should be included here. This particular project may not have drawings. You don't really need a drawing to scrape and sand and repaint anything. So this doesn't need a drawing for that. So for smaller projects, if you don't have a drawing and you don't need one, then you don't need one. There's not drawing, it's just for the sake of drawings. Okay, so describe the work and the impact on the feature. So you're describing the work, and this is where we're going to look at, what are you going to do to this character defining feature? Are you going to repair rather than replace, as it says in the standards for rehabilitation? Or what? So what's going to happen to it? So this says most of the siding will be scraped, sanded, and repainted. And those boards that are in poor condition will be replaced with cedar that will be cut to match dimensions and profile of the existing weatherboard. All new siding will be installed to match the overlap distance of the existing. And so this meets the standards because it is being repaired, and where it is damaged beyond repair, it is being replaced in kind. So that means they're replacing wood with wood of the same profile. And so that approach meets the standards. So this would be good to go. If this work description said siding is beyond repair, we're going to remove the siding and put a party plank. We would expect to see photos of very damaged siding. We would also expect to see a detailed drawing of the profile of the historic siding alongside a detail of the proposed siding to see that they matched as close as possible. I want to stress here that no one product works in all scenarios. There's no such thing as a product that is approved for use in historic tax credit projects. Also remember that you must illustrate in the part 3 that the work matches what is approved in the part 2. And according to MPS guidance, if there's a discrepancy between the written portion and the plans, the written portion takes precedence over the plans. But if there is a discrepancy, we catch it, we will ask you to clarify that. So with larger projects, it can get a little complicated, especially on the interiors, because there's different ways to break up the components, such as sometimes it's, there's 9 floors of hotel rooms, in between, on a 12-story building, and the 9 floors of hotel rooms are exactly the same. The hallways are the same and everything's the same. So in that case, you could group a lot of the building together, depending on what the treatment is. It could be your first floor, or it could be main ballroom or anything like that. So use your best judgment on how to break those up and describe them appropriately. Okay, so just to give you a little perspective about when I sit down and look at an application, I want to know what is going to happen to the historic character defining features. So no matter what it is, whether it's the circulation pattern, the storefronts, or the wood trim in the second floor hallway. Sometimes they're in a state of disrepair, and it's important to describe what the endpoint will be. When I look at photos like these two, I look for a description for that feature specifically, and I'm like, what's going to happen to this feature? It's easy actually to just go. I'll sit down, I'll read the description of rehabilitation, and I'll go through the photos and say, here's a historic feature I see in the photos. Let me go see what's going to happen to it. So that helps you write a part 2 from that perspective. That's how I look at it. If I see something that does not meet the standards, I will tell you that I don't think it will be approved. My suggestions are recommendations for a successful application. I'm not an official approver. However, Dave and I have a really good working relationship, and we talk to each other. And, you know, my opinion, my recommendation, and my comments are going to be taken seriously. And to be honest, you know, our service is a little harder on it than I would even be. So David also looks for my opinion, because I have often visited a building, so I can really tell him, you know, this is what I think. So again, this is a good reason to send a draft so we can find these things before. Okay. So
Kim, just a heads up, it's 11.
what time am I supposed to be done?
I think 11.
Uh-oh, goodness. Oh, you're right. Okay. Well, let's see. I just have 2 more. So just a note about amendments. So amendments are often used to amend a part 2 or part 3 application. So they're required for changes to the scope in the part 2, or for clarification sometimes of a detail that was not submitted. So amendments have a cover sheet that must be signed by the applicant, and you can send them to me via email, send me a hard copy, and I'll send it to David. Important thing to know is amendments to part 3 applications must be submitted for any work on the property during the 5 years after the project is completed. Okay, it's just like a little mini part 2. The part 3 is the request for the certification of your completed work. So once you are complete with your project, you will take after photos, basically of every view that you sent us, and then before photos, so we can see what happened. And then the application is just this one single sheet where you list the property owners. There's a separate sheet for that, but this is where you say what your qualified rehabilitation expenditures were and your total project cost, and then the photos. So I think I've probably gone over more of these things. We get the gist. And I had some pretty before and afters. Here's the Elks Temple in Tacoma, the Linden Department Store, Otis Hotel. And then last but not least, if you want to know where all the tax credit projects are, I made a map of the projects. So you can go to the map. I'll put the link in the chat of our website, and you can turn on the layers and go to tax credit projects, and they will all pop up. I got about 2014 to 2020 on here, and I need to update for 2021, but you can click on it. It'll tell you how much. I'm going to add the years. It's a cool map, and it has lots of other stuff on it if you want to check it out.